I stood there in my driveway, trembling with rage, holding a certified letter that would change everything. The envelope bore the logo of Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, and inside was a notice that made my blood run cold. Final notice: violation of community standards, $500 daily fine effective immediately. My crime? Having my 89-year-old mother's wheelchair ramp visible from the street for more than 30 days without proper architectural approval. The same ramp that had taken me 3 months of savings to build after her stroke. The same ramp that gave her the dignity to visit her grandchildren in the home I'd worked 2 jobs to afford. But here's the thing that made my hands shake as I read that letter. I could hear the party music pumping from 3 houses down. The house belonging to Margaret Chin, our HOA President. The same house that had different cars in the driveway every weekend, different faces at the windows, and a steady stream of rolling suitcases being wheeled up the walkway. You see, while Margaret was threatening to put a lien on my home over a wheelchair ramp, she was running something much more profitable and much more illegal right under our noses. And I was about to discover just how deep this corruption went. 2 years earlier, when I first moved to Meadowbrook Estates with my family, it felt like a dream come true. The neighborhood was everything I'd hoped for: tree-lined streets, well-maintained homes, and that perfect suburban tranquility I'd craved after years of cramped city apartments. My wife Sarah and I had scraped together every penny for the down payment. We'd sold her grandmother's jewelry, cashed out my 401k early, and worked overtime for months just to afford this slice of the American dream. Our 8-year-old daughter Emma was starting 3rd grade at the local elementary school, and our toddler son Jake was taking his first steps on the pristine sidewalks. The HOA seemed like a good thing back then. During our house tour, the real estate agent smiled warmly as she explained the community standards. They keep property values high, she said, pointing to the perfectly manicured lawns and matching mailboxes. Everyone follows the same guidelines, so it stays beautiful forever. Margaret Chin introduced herself the very first week. She appeared at my front door with a basket of homemade cookies and a warm smile that seemed genuine. In her 50s, impeccably dressed, with the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about money, she radiated authority. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, her voice honey-sweet. "I'm Margaret, the HOA President. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask." She handed me a thick binder, the community guidelines. As I flipped through page after page of regulations about fence heights, approved paint colors, and landscaping requirements, Margaret chatted about neighborhood barbecues and the annual holiday decorating contest. "We're like one big family here," she said, and I believed her. The first few months were blissful. Emma made friends with the kids next door. Sarah started a small garden in our backyard. I installed a tire swing on our oak tree and spent Saturday mornings pushing Jake as high as his giggling would allow. The neighbors seemed friendly enough, though I noticed something odd. Most of them kept to themselves, offering polite waves, but rarely stopping to chat. When I mentioned this to Margaret during one of her periodic check-ins, she laughed it off. "Oh, you know how it is. Everyone's so busy these days. But don't worry, you'll fit right in." Looking back, I should have paid more attention to the subtle signs, the way conversations stopped when Margaret approached. How my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, would glance nervously at Margaret's house whenever we talked over the fence. The way people scattered after community meetings, like they couldn't wait to escape. But I was too focused on building our life to notice the cracks in the foundation. The first violation notice came 6 months after we moved in. I found it tucked under my windshield wiper one Tuesday morning, a crisp white paper with the HOA letterhead and Margaret's signature at the bottom. "Dear homeowner," it read, "your vehicle has been parked on the street for more than the allowable 48-hour period. Please move to your designated driveway space immediately to avoid further action." I stood there, coffee mug in hand, staring at my 15-year-old Honda Civic. Sarah's SUV was in the garage, and my car was parked exactly where I'd left it every day since we moved in. I called Margaret immediately. "Oh, that," she said, her voice suddenly cooler than I remembered. "Someone complained. You know how it is. We have to follow up on all complaints." "But who complained? And my car was only there since Sunday night." "I'm sorry, but complaint sources are confidential, and our records show it was there since Saturday." I wanted to argue, but something in her tone warned me off. I moved my car and forgot about it. The notices kept coming. In October, it was my Halloween decorations, apparently. The plastic skeleton in my front yard was excessively macabre for a family neighborhood. In November, my porch light was the wrong shade of white. In December, my Christmas lights extended 6 inches beyond the approved perimeter. Each violation came with a fine: $25, $50, $100, always with Margaret's neat signature and the same cold language about community standards. "This is getting ridiculous," Sarah said one evening, holding the latest notice. "They're targeting us." "Don't be paranoid," I replied, but deep down, I was starting to wonder. The breaking point came in March, when my mother had her stroke. Mom lived 3 hours away in her own little apartment, fiercely independent despite her age. When the call came from the hospital, Sarah and I drove through the night to be by her side. The doctors were optimistic about her recovery, but she'd need months of physical therapy and couldn't live alone anymore. "She can stay with us," I told Sarah as we sat in the hospital waiting room. "We have the extra bedroom." But when we brought Mom home 2 weeks later, it became clear that our front steps were impossible for her to navigate with her walker. The stroke had affected her left side, and the 3 concrete steps might as well have been Mount Everest. I researched wheelchair ramps obsessively, finally settling on a modular aluminum ramp that could be installed without permanent alterations to the house. It cost $1,800, money we didn't really have. But watching Mom struggle to visit her grandchildren was breaking my heart. The ramp took a weekend to install. It was beautiful, professional looking, and blended well with our front porch. Mom cried tears of joy when she could finally wheel herself up to hug Emma and Jake. 3 days later, the notice appeared. Architectural violation, unauthorized structure. It read, "All exterior modifications require written approval from the Architectural Review Committee. Failure to remove structure within 48 hours will result in daily fines of $100. I called Margaret immediately, my hands shaking with anger. "Margaret, this is a wheelchair ramp for my elderly mother. Surely there's some accommodation dash." "I'm sorry," she interrupted, "but the rules are the rules. You should have applied for approval before installation." "Fine, I'll apply now. How long does approval take?" "The committee meets monthly. Then there's a 30-day review period. Then a community input phase. That could take months." "I'm sorry, but process is process." I hung up and immediately started filling out the application. 12 pages of detailed architectural drawings, neighbor impact statements, and a non-refundable $500 processing fee. But the fines kept coming. Every single day, like clockwork. $100, then $200, then $300. Margaret's signature appeared on each one, increasingly illegible, as if she couldn't be bothered to take care with something that was draining my family's savings. "We can't afford this," Sarah said, her voice breaking as she calculated our dwindling bank account. "The fines are more than our mortgage payment." I watched my mother's face crumple with guilt every time another notice arrived. She started talking about moving to a nursing home, saying she didn't want to be a burden. The woman who had raised 3 children alone after my father died, who had worked 2 jobs to put me through college, was apologizing for needing help. That's when the night visit started. I was up late working on my laptop, trying to find some legal loophole in the HOA bylaws, when I saw the figure walking slowly past our house. It was past midnight, and whoever it was carried a small flashlight, sweeping it across our front yard like they were searching for something. The next night, the same thing. And the next. On the 4th night, I crept to the window and watched more carefully. The figure stopped at our mailbox, spent several minutes there, then continued down the street. In the morning, I found nothing unusual, but the feeling of being watched, being hunted, was suffocating. "Maybe we should just remove the ramp," Sarah whispered one night as we lay in bed listening to Mom crying softly in the next room. "Take out a loan. Find somewhere else for her to live." No. The word came out harder than I intended. This is our home. She's my mother. We're not running. But privately, I was terrified. The fines had reached $2,000. Our savings were nearly gone. And Margaretchen seemed determined to destroy us over a wheelchair ramp. What I didn't know yet was that Margaret had much bigger secrets to hide, and that my little wheelchair ramp drama was just a smokescreen for something far more sinister happening right under our noses. The revelation came on a warm Saturday evening in late April. Sarah had taken the kids to her sister's house for the weekend, and Mom was napping in her chair when I heard the music start. Up at Margaret's place again. It had become a regular occurrence. Every Friday and Saturday night, sometimes Thursdays. Too. Loud music, unfamiliar cars, people coming and going at all hours. I'd assumed Margaret just liked to entertain, but something about the pattern nagged at me. This time, I decided to investigate. I grabbed a beer and wandered out to my front porch, trying to look casual. Margaret's house was only 3 doors down, and from my vantage point, I could see her driveway clearly. What I saw made my blood run cold. A steady stream of people was carrying suitcases up her walkway. Not just 1 or 2 people. Groups of 4, 5, 6 at a time. Young couples with weekend bags. Families with children and inflatable pool toys. A bachelor party with matching t-shirts and coolers full of beer. These weren't party guests. These were paying customers. I grabbed my phone and started taking pictures. Over the next 2 hours, I documented at least 40 different people entering Margaret's house. People who clearly didn't know each other. People who were checking their phones for addresses. People who looked exactly like tourists. Visiting an Airbnb rental. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Margaretchen, our HOA president who was threatening to seize my home over a wheelchair ramp, was running an illegal short-term rental operation right here in our strictly residential neighborhood. I spent the rest of the weekend researching. Our HOA covenants were crystal clear. No property shall be used for commercial purposes. No property shall be rented for periods less than 6 months without written approval from the board of directors. But when I checked the city's business license database, there was no record of Margaret having any kind of rental permit. When I searched Airbnb, VRBO, and other rental platforms, using her address, I found nothing under her name. That's when I realized how clever she was. She wasn't listing the property herself. She was using shell companies, fake names, probably even offshore accounts to hide the income. The HOA presidency gave her the perfect cover. Who would suspect the person enforcing the rules of breaking them? Monday morning, I called the city's code enforcement office. I'd like to report a suspected illegal short-term rental operation, I said, my heart pounding. Address? The clerk asked. I gave Margaret's address and explained what I'd observed. The clerk took down my information and promised to send an inspector, but warned me that without concrete evidence, it would be difficult to prove. That's when I knew I needed help. Mrs. Rodriguez, my next-door neighbor, had always seemed nervous around Margaret. When I knocked on her door that evening, she initially tried to brush me off. "I don't want any trouble," she said, glancing nervously toward Margaret's house. "Please," I said. "I think she's breaking the law, and she's trying to force my family out over a wheelchair ramp for my elderly mother." Something in my voice must have reached her, because she invited me in. Over coffee, Mrs. Rodriguez's story poured out like water from a broken dam. She'd been documenting Margaret's activities for months, taking photos, keeping a journal of all the traffic and noise complaints that Margaret ignored when it came to her own property. "She's been doing this for 2 years, Mrs. Rodriguez whispered. "Maybe longer. My husband and I tried to complain once, and suddenly we started getting violation notices for everything. Our garden gnome was inappropriate lawn ornamentation. Our bird feeder was attracting pests. We stopped complaining. She pulled out a thick folder filled with photographs and detailed notes. The evidence was overwhelming. Margaret had been running a sophisticated short-term rental operation, sometimes hosting multiple groups simultaneously, while using her HOA position to intimidate anyone who might complain. There are others, Mrs. Rodriguez said. The Johnsons moved away last year because of her harassment. The Patel family almost lost their house over fines for excessive ethnic cooking, odors. Anyone who threatens her business gets targeted. We were joined by Tom Walsh from down the street, then the Hendersons from the corner house. One by one, Margaret's victims emerged from their silence, sharing stories of harassment, frivolous fines, and selective enforcement that painted a picture of systematic corruption. She's been using the HOA as her personal weapon, Tom said, his voice shaking with suppressed anger, keeping us all in line while she makes thousands of dollars breaking the same rules she uses to terrorize the rest of us. That night, we formed an alliance. We called ourselves the Meadowbrook Truth Coalition, and we had one goal: expose Margaret Chen and take back our neighborhood. The war was about to begin. Our plan was methodical and devastating. We spent 3 weeks gathering irrefutable evidence, while pretending everything was normal. Mrs. Rodriguez, it turned out, had a background in investigative journalism before she retired. Tom Walsh was a former police detective. The Hendersons owned a security company. We were not the helpless homeowners Margaret thought we were. Using a combination of public records requests, surveillance, and good old-fashioned detective work, we uncovered the full scope of Margaret's operation. She wasn't just running one illegal Airbnb. She was operating a network of 5 properties throughout the city, all hidden behind shell companies and fake listings. The money trail was staggering. Based on our calculations, Margaret was pulling in over $300,000 a year in untaxed rental income while serving as an unpaid HOA president. The irony was bitter. She was using her position of trust to silence anyone who might expose her crimes. But we needed more than financial records. We needed to catch her in the act. Tom suggested we set up a sting operation. We book one of her units under fake names, document everything from the inside, get her on camera accepting money for an illegal rental. It took us a week to find her listings. Margaret was clever. She used different platforms, different names, even different property descriptions to avoid detection. But the photos were unmistakable. Her kitchen granite countertops, her distinctive light fixtures, her view of the community park. The listing was under the name Melody's Mountain Retreat and promised luxury accommodations in an exclusive gated community. The rate was $300 a night with a minimum 3-night stay. Mrs. Rodriguez's daughter, visiting from college, volunteered to make the booking using her ID and credit card. We scheduled it for Memorial Day weekend, peak tourist season, maximum occupancy, perfect for documenting the scope of the operation. The night before our sting, I couldn't sleep. This was it, our chance to finally expose the corruption that had been poisoning our community. But I was also terrified. If we were wrong, if we couldn't prove what we suspected, Margaret would destroy us all. Friday evening arrived with perfect weather. Sarah and the kids were visiting her mother, giving me the freedom to coordinate our operation. At 6 p.m., Mrs. Rodriguez's daughter arrived at Margaret's house, rolling a small suitcase and carrying recording equipment hidden in her purse. The rest of us watched from strategic positions throughout the neighborhood. Tom was parked at the corner with telephoto camera equipment. The Hendersons were monitoring from their upstairs window. Mrs. Rodriguez and I were in my living room, coordinating everything through text messages. At 6:15 p.m., Margaret answered her front door personally. She was dressed casually, nothing like the formal HOA president we knew. She welcomed our undercover guest warmly, handed over keys, and spent 10 minutes explaining house rules, how to work the hot tub, where to find extra towels, how to avoid disturbing the neighbors. We had her on camera accepting cash payment for an illegal short-term rental. But we weren't done yet. Over the weekend, we documented everything. The constant stream of different guests. The commercial laundry service that picked up and delivered bedding. The cleaning crew that serviced the property between bookings. The lockbox hidden behind the mailbox where keys were stored for self-check-in guests. Margaret Chin wasn't just breaking HOA rules. She was running a full-scale commercial hospitality business in a residential neighborhood, evading taxes and violating countless city ordinances. Monday morning, we struck with coordinated precision. I filed a complaint with the IRS, providing detailed financial evidence of unreported income. Mrs. Rodriguez contacted the city planning department with documentation of illegal commercial use. Tom submitted a report to the state attorney general's office about HOA abuse of power. The Hendersons filed complaints with the tourism board about unlicensed accommodations. But the killing blow came from an unexpected source. Remember those mysterious nighttime visits to my house? Tom's detective instincts had been nagging at him about those, so he'd set up a hidden camera focused on my mailbox. What we discovered on the footage made everything else pale in comparison. Margaret had been tampering with my mail. Federal crime. Felony charges. Prison time. The footage showed Margaret opening my mailbox, photographing the contents with her phone, and replacing everything carefully. She'd been monitoring my legal research, my correspondence with lawyers, my communication with other HOA members. She'd known exactly what I was planning because she'd been committing federal crimes to spy on me. When the postal inspectors knocked on Margaret's door Wednesday morning, flanked by IRS agents and city code enforcement officers, I was watching from my front porch with my mother. Beside me in her wheelchair, Margaret's perfect composure finally cracked. She tried to run, actually tried to sprint to her car, while federal agents stood in her driveway. The woman who had terrorized our neighborhood with violation notices and threats was reduced to a panicked criminal fleeing justice. They arrested her on multiple charges: mail tampering, tax evasion, operating an unlicensed business, violating city zoning laws, and abuse of fiduciary duty as an HOA officer. Her mugshot, when it appeared in the local paper, showed a woman who looked nothing like the polished authority figure we'd feared for so long. Within 48 hours, the story had exploded across local news. HOA President's double life exposed. The headlines read, "Wheelchair ramp complaint leads to federal charges." Meadowbrook Estates corruption scandal. The best part, Margaret's illegal rental income gave us legal grounds to void every single violation notice she'd ever issued. Her abuse of power meant that every fine, every threat, every intimidation tactic was legally null and void. My mother's wheelchair ramp stayed exactly where it was. The aftermath was swift and satisfying in ways I'd never imagined. Margaret Chin pleaded guilty to federal mail tampering charges and was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, plus 3 years of probation and $150,000 in fines and restitution. The IRS seized her properties to cover back taxes and penalties. Her Airbnb empire, built on deception and intimidation, crumbled overnight. The shell companies were dissolved, the illegal rentals shut down, and her victims, including everyone in our neighborhood who'd been targeted, received compensation from her seized assets. But the most beautiful justice was watching our community heal. With Margaret gone, the real character of Meadowbrook Estates emerged. Neighbors who had been afraid to speak to each other began hosting block parties. The ridiculous violation notices stopped completely. People painted their houses in colors they actually liked, planted gardens that made them happy, and hung Christmas lights without measuring them to the inch. Mrs. Rodriguez started a neighborhood garden club. Tom Walsh organized weekend barbecues. The Hendersons set up a tool-sharing program. We discovered that when people aren't living in fear of arbitrary punishment, they naturally create the kind of community that HOA rules claim to protect. My mother lived with us for another year before passing peacefully in her sleep. During that time, she became the unofficial grandmother of the entire neighborhood. Kids would stop by too. show her their artwork. Neighbors would bring her soup when she felt unwell, and her wheelchair ramp became a symbol of what real community looks like, people taking care of each other instead of enforcing rules. The new HOA board, elected in an emergency meeting after Margaret's arrest, immediately amended our covenants to include protections for elderly and disabled residents. They established an ombudsman process for dispute resolution and transparency requirements for all board communications. Most importantly, they instituted term limits and mandatory financial audits. No one person would ever again wield the kind of unchecked power that Margaret had abused. Looking back now, 3 years later, I realized that Margaretchen taught me something valuable about the nature of authority and corruption. She wasn't evil in some dramatic movie villain way. She was just a person who discovered that she could use a tiny bit of power to make money and control others, and she convinced herself that everyone else would do the same thing in her position. But that's not true. Most people, when given authority, try to use it responsibly. Most neighbors want to help each other, not tear each other down. Most communities can thrive without someone standing over them with a clipboard, measuring their lawn ornaments and timing their parking violations. The wheelchair ramp is still there, by the way. It's weathered now, the aluminum a little duller, but it's solid and safe. Sometimes I see neighborhood kids using it as a skateboard ramp when they think nobody's watching, and I just smile. Because that's what a real community looks like, not perfect lawns and matching mailboxes, but people finding joy and connection in unexpected places, taking care of each other when times get tough, and standing up together when someone tries to tear them down. Margaretchen thought she could use fear and intimidation to build her little empire. What she actually did was teach us that we're stronger than we realized, braver than we knew, and that sometimes the best way to protect your home is to fight for it. My mother always said that home isn't just the place where you live, it's the place where people care about you. Thanks to a wheelchair ramp, a corrupt HOA president, and the courage of neighbors who refuse to stay silent, I finally understand what you meant. And that's a lesson worth more than any property value Margaretchen's rules could have protected.